Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another Ask the HR Expert webinar. It looks like attendees are still popping in, and so while everyone gets in and gets settled, I'll take just a couple minutes to introduce myself, explain what the HR Expert series is, and provide some housekeeping rules for the presentation today. So my name is Marcus Wilbers. I am the Chief Client Officer and General Counsel for Tandem HR. And I'll be today's moderator. So before I turn it over to our panelists to let them introduce themselves, just wanted to share with everyone that Ask the HR Expert is a webinar series that we host every month. And it covers a wide variety of HR topics. Previous topics, for example, have included things like just general HR questions, how to complete Form I-9s, navigating leaves of absence, hosting a successful open enrollment, how to performance manage your employees effectively, and resources for an HR department of one. So if there's any topics that you'd like us to cover, please share them with us. We want this to be as interactive and as helpful as possible. So our topic today is turnover and retention, kind of looking at both sides of that coin. Before we officially begin, I want to make everyone aware that we are recording the webinar today. So you can take notes if you like, but just know that if you miss something, you will get a recording of this webinar in your email inbox if you registered for the presentation today. That'll happen obviously after we finish up. Also, we have muted everyone. That's not because we don't want to hear from you. It's just because we want to make sure that everyone can hear the discussion that's going on. We want to eliminate as much background noise as possible. So if you would like to participate, we did get a couple of questions from some of our registrants before the webinar, but if something comes to mind, please send it to us. The Q&A, if you look at the bottom of your scroll bar or your taskbar, there's a Q&A with the bubble icons. Just pop a question in there. I've got that up. I'll be monitoring it throughout the presentation, and we'll try and weave it into the discussion the best way that we can. If we're not able to address it during the discussion, we'll get to it at the end, and we'll also leave some time at the end for additional questions. At the end of the conversation today, I'll have my contact information up. If there's something that comes to mind that you don't get a chance to ask, or if you have a follow-up question afterwards, please send me a note. I'll get back to you with the best answer that I have. So with all of that being said, I think we're finally ready to begin, and I will let the speakers introduce themselves. Kirk, Lauren, and Lisa, why don't you introduce yourselves and share a little bit about yourselves with the audience?
I'm going to let the ladies go first. So Lauren, you want to jump in?
Sure. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Lauren Dorlag. I am a director of HR here at Tandem HR, supporting client relations. I've been in the HR world for about 12 years. Supply chain, retail, professional services. I've worked in a lot of different industries. And employee turnover and retention is one of my favorite parts to support leaders on when it comes to HR. So excited to be part of this discussion today, Marcus.
Thanks.
Hello, everyone. I'm Lisa Brock. I'm the HR business partner here at Tandem HR. I've been in HR for over 15 years now in a variety of industries, including oil and gas, healthcare, manufacturing. But I work pretty closely with our healthcare clients as their HR business partner, really helping them with a lot of compliance issues. One of the passions that I have is leadership development. So I really like working with leaders and really helping them to work with their employees in a better fashion.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thanks, Lisa. My name's Kirk Davis. I am also a director at Tandem over our enterprise client relations team, serving our largest clients at Tandem. I have scary, but over 20 years of experience in the HR arena as a background with an employment lawyer and consulting. I have worked primarily with clients in the healthcare space, hospitality, areas as well, and small professional organizations like law firms and CPA firms. The topic of turnover and retention is also near and dear to my heart, retaining employees. We talk a lot about how to save costs and how to impact our bottom line. And this is an area that is often overlooked. So retaining those employees, keeping them in the fold, as opposed to the cost associated with having to rehire and retrain is a topic I can't wait to get into.
Awesome. Thanks, Kurt. Yeah, thanks everyone. We've got a great panel today, so I'm excited to kind of walk through the questions that we received and see where the discussion takes us. I know it's something that we're all passionate about. So I guess first off, I know we all care deeply about turnover and retention. We know why it's important, but if we're talking to people that maybe don't deal with it every day or don't have that same passion, let's start off with why should they care about employee turnover? Why is that such a big deal?
So yeah, I'll take this question. So it is very, very important, and sometimes it can be overlooked by employers because there's so much other things that are on their mind, but it really does matter. You know, we've heard the old saying, time is money. So when an organization has high turnover, the first to be affected is productivity, followed by morale, and then also growth and innovation. So all that can affect an organization financially, which is your bottom line. So work can't get done without people, and without the right people, an organization, they can't grow and we can't make money. So that's one of the reasons why we really like to work with our employers and organizations and our clients to really hone that in and let them know how bad it affects the bottom line and it impacts an organization.
Yeah, a couple big buckets there: productivity, time, financial resources, and morale. We'll dive into those, but just to highlight, that really can have a big impact on an organization. So we can list them off, but we'll dive a little bit deeper as we go. So I guess those are why you should care if you're a business owner, that it impacts really some of the core of your business. But what is employee turnover? Can we define it a little bit better? And what about employee retention? Can we take a stab at defining that too?
Yeah, so by way of definition, employee turnover in the most simplistic way is the number of individuals that leave your organization divided by the number of active employees multiplied by 100 to get a percentage. So if you had, 10 people leave your organization, you have 100 employees at that time, you have a 10% turnover rate. Think of retention as the inverse. So retention is, I don't want to say that turnover is bad, retention is good, because we're going to talk about that a little bit more. There are times when turnover is needed in an organization, but think of them as the inverse. So retention is the employees that stay with your organization that you retain. And yeah, like Lisa said, right. It's expensive. It's really expensive. It's costly, it's expensive, and it can have big, cultural impacts, when you do have turnover. So, is that enough of a definition, Marcus? Or you want me to dig in any more on kind of what it is?
No, I think you got it. It's separations divided by number of active employees. And so if we think about it just in those simplistic terms, obviously, smaller organizations, the impact of one person leaving is going to have a bigger impact on your turnover because you have a smaller denominator, I guess. So one person leaving is going to affect a smaller organization more than it is a bigger organization. And I guess
Right. And
yeah, go ahead.
And say we love data and numbers in HR. Believe us, we really do. But right, think of it that way. Small organizations turnover could be much more impactful. But also think of those roles. So if you have 50 people in a role, one or two, people turning over might not be as detrimental to the training and development versus a really specialized role or a role that's really hard to source or recruit for. So not all turnover is created equal.
Yeah, and just number of people leaving, number of people staying, we get like a turnover ratio, but I know we've all seen turnover stats that dive a little deeper and look and kind of help you understand that a little bit more about what's happening. Are there different ways to break that down to maybe tell I guess a more complex picture associated with, or a more complete picture associated with turnover? How do you show it to your clients?
Yeah, I think if you look at calculating the cost of turnover, it's unique to each organization, but there are definitely some common buckets that we want to capture. And really, when we're looking at that, we want you to look at things like time to hire, time to onboard, the offboarding time, Vacancy costs, how long is this position open? How long is someone else having to carry the load while this position is available until you can fill that again? The effort to hire, like, are there people out there in the pool right now? Is this a tight labor market? All of those things need to go into calculating this cost. And then the effort to onboard, like, how much time are they going to need to transfer into a new position? That person, even when that magic offer is made and they commit to your new organization, you still have more time on the scale that you're weighing and you're balancing in your costs. So we want to make sure that we're calculating all of those things and examining all of those areas so that you do get a true cost of turnover.
Yeah, quick story on this. I worked with a client, had about 2,000 employees, and they dug into it a little bit and made, you're always going to have to make some assumptions, right? When you're doing this type of analysis, like let's say it takes 2 weeks to bring someone in. Let's say it takes 4 weeks to get them to, productivity level. But they did the analysis and found that it was, turnover was costing them millions of dollars. And that's not something that's going to jump off of a balance sheet, right? But once they saw that, that's something that gets their attention, right? And then they start to dig in a little bit more. And you can dive in pretty deep on turnover metrics and look at, are there themes? Are there patterns? Are there, if you have multiple locations, is turnover worse at one location than another? Is turnover worse under one manager or one, director than another, right? It can help you decide where to focus your efforts, because you're right, it can add up very, very quickly. And that's just on the financial side of things.
Yeah, and not just those pure costs of turnover, but if you're looking at this and we're using numbers and we're using metrics to try to get ahead of this data, one of the things that you want to look at is if an employee is considering your organization, is considering leaving your organization because of compensation or pay, you should know what the cost of turnover is, because you're going to have to make a calculated business decision on, is it worth it to engage in negotiations with that employee to perhaps pay them more because it's less of a financial impact to your organization to offer them a raise that's less than the cost of turnover in that position. So again, another very strategic decision that if you don't have the data, if you don't have the information to kind of explore this and dig deeper, you might be making a decision that makes a detrimental impact on your bottom line.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And sometimes I've been a part of those conversations, and there's, there can be just attitudes that impact it, that, well, we shouldn't pay this much to this type of position. I mean, that's fine to have. When I'm thinking about that, I'm thinking about like business owners usually, or, CFOs. We shouldn't have to pay this much for this position. Okay, you can feel that way, but let's look at the data, to your point, Kirk, and like, hey, from a purely financial standpoint, we're better off, raising their pay than trying to bring someone else in. The other point I like to remind business owners of is that you hired your managers, supervisors, directors, you put those people in those positions because they're good at the job that they're doing. That does not mean that they are good at interviewing or onboarding people or getting people up to productivity. And that's not probably where you want them spending a majority of their time, because that's not why you put them in that role. So let them focus on the things that they can do well, instead of, constantly refilling your employee roster. Kirk, you talked a little bit about, the impact on an organization, and Lisa, I think you did too, about culture. Obviously, if you have more turnover coming in and going out, that has an impact on culture. But how do you know if you have a good culture to begin with, and how do you know if turnover is impacting it?
Yeah, really the first step is to ask your employees this very question. Surveys, if you do any type of engagement surveys or just getting a pulse survey on your culture, even if you do that at the very least, maybe once a year, twice a year would be great. You get an idea as to what's happening inside your organization. So employers should be kind of checking in and seeing how their employees are feeling. Especially anonymously, you'll get more answers that way. And there's tons of tools out there to gather that data and then help you analyze and look at the trends, because one year might be different from the next. So a toxic work environment, if you're getting that information, or if some of those things are coming in your surveys, that a toxic work environment or culture, is happening, it does impact, that voluntary turnover, because sometimes your A players will just leave quietly. They might not want to kick up a fuss and sound like, they're complaining about what's going on, and they'll just go somewhere else. So if an employee feels, unsafe, if they feel unappreciated, if they don't feel like they have a purpose in the work that they're doing, they'll go somewhere else. So, and the current labor market, it allows them to do it very easily.
Yeah.
I was just looking at stats, and the Bureau of Labor Statistics came out last week that, the job openings are at 8.7 million. Whereas our unemployment, the people that are out there collecting unemployment benefits, are only 1.87 million. So there's a huge gap there between job openings and people who are unemployed right now. So there is way more jobs for people to just constantly do that job hopping, because it's available to them.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Survey. How do you know if you have a good culture? Ask your employees, right? Have you worked with clients to do that, Lisa, or anyone? And if you have, like, what advice would you give an employer who's going to do like an employee survey?
Yeah, one of my healthcare clients, they've actually been doing this yearly, and they've been sending out surveys to get an idea as to, job satisfaction and how the employees are feeling. And a lot of it that they're getting it's coming out of compensation. So we know healthcare, it can be very difficult, because of the insurance premium and what they get for those rates. So it can be difficult for the healthcare system to do that, but they are finding ways to do that and bring in different revenue. And they have been making those increases, once or twice per year with their staff, and that is helping.
The other thing that I would say too, if I can jump in real quick here, is that we don't have to overcomplicate this. Like, it is really about just listening to your employees. But to Marcus's point, a lot of times managers are promoted because they're good at their job. They may not have been promoted because they're good with people. So providing them with good training and development themselves, talking to them about how they can talk to their employees, making their employees feel heard. It's those very simple things that can go a long way in helping your retention efforts. So if your managers aren't trained on how to deal with people, how to have difficult conversations, that can make a huge impact on whether your employees are feeling like they're connected with the organization, because about 57% of employees will say they will leave if they don't feel like they have some kind of personal connection in the workplace. So get your managers and leaders engaged, have them talking to your employees. That's going to make a big impact on your bottom line and your retention efforts overall.
Yeah, Kirk is right on that. And there's lots of tools out there too to help develop managers and leaders to have those, conversations and prep them, and even during difficult conversations. So sometimes managers, like Marcus says, they're good at their job, but they're just not understanding how to work and communicate with their people as well. But there's lots of training out there and development that we can help get managers in the right path there.
Yeah, and the advice I would give an employer, if they're wanting to do like an engagement survey or an employee survey for the first time, I would say, like, pause and think about that, because I think it's a good thing to do, but I think the worst thing you can do is do the survey and then go silent, and then not like, I personally, I don't think it is. I think it does you more harm than good than to give if you give a survey and then don't share the results of that survey with the employees. Now, I'm not saying you have to share every like nitty-gritty comment where they say like, oh, Marcus is a terrible manager or whatever. Like, you probably don't want to put that out to the company. I mean, maybe you do, but if you have like, and that's where like constructing the survey is very important. If you're going to do like a 1 to 5, like a rating scale or something, or strongly agree, no input, disagree, strongly disagree. If you do something like that, I almost think you have to, I think you owe it to them to bounce back the stats. And then taking it a step further, if the stats aren't pretty, if you get bad news back, you got to do something about it. You got to tell the employees like, hey, I don't have the answers right now. You may not have the answers right now, but we're gonna get together as a team and come up with next steps, and then we'll announce those next steps, right? So I think if you just let it go silent, it's gonna do more harm than good. Sorry, Lauren, go ahead.
No, I was gonna share something similar of when I've helped organizations and helped companies, work on this engagement survey. I think it can be really intimidating, but the advice I would say is start small. It doesn't need to be an 82 question, very expensive survey. Like start with informal surveys, right? Train your management team to ask some of these. Do it and like there's tools out there, it doesn't have to be complex. An HR partner can help you ask some really specific questions that will get some good data. But similar, when I've helped organizations with this, it's really exciting sometimes to put the project plan together and think about how you're going to do the survey, but don't launch the survey. I totally agree with you on that. Don't do the survey if you're not going to do the follow through. And if you're not prepared to have the conversations and have the action planning and talk to the organization about what you're doing, I have definitely seen it cause more harm to do the survey. And then not everything, like you said, right? You're not going to action everything, but to not bubble up, those 2 or 3 main themes and really talk to the organization about what you're doing to improve the feedback they gave you.
Yeah, the interesting thing about those surveys too is I find that, when I work with clients, they actually have a perception. A lot of times the leadership has a perception where they think they know what, is going on with the employees and what they want. So they've been throwing other things at it, and then come to find out they get a whole nother reaction out of the data that they get for those surveys. And they're like, oh, here maybe we're giving them more benefits or all these other things, but really what they really wanted was more flexibility in their work. So, getting that, it really helps leaders get a better picture rather than going based on perception or maybe hearing somebody here and there making some comments. So it just gives them a better insight as to where to go.
Great point. It actually, leaders can turn that around too to say, well, we're not increasing rates or we're not doing these bonus plans anymore because the surveys indicate you value flexibility more. And so we're shifting operations to accommodate that. So, but tying it back to turnover, how does turnover impact the culture you have, whatever it might be? You use the surveys to discover what your culture is, but how does turnover impact your culture? Anyone want to jump in?
Yeah, I can go over that a little bit. When we talk about having, that turnover with the retention strategy, they're both are important. So looking at turnover and losing your top performers, it's very costly to organizations. So with industries, especially right now with everything since, after COVID, industries like construction, healthcare, hospitality, some of these are the highest turnover rates right now. So it can really impact these organizations. So if we're looking at healthcare, when there are staffing shortages, such as their nurses or their physicians, they can become burnout, and that can lead to patient errors. So that's very costly to the organization. And obviously we don't want patient errors either. And likewise in construction, if we have tired workers because there's workers shortages and there's a lot of the job that needs to be done and they have to work long hours, this can lead to costly safety mistakes. So one really interesting stat that a lot of people that's been done by studies that maybe they don't realize is it takes an average of 1 to 2 years for an employee to be fully productive in their role with the knowledge and the experience that they need to do their job. So think about that productivity and revenue that is lost when you have one of your top performers that have all of this information, and if they walk out the door, all that knowledge goes with them. So are people replaceable? Sure they are. But how much do you value that knowledge that they hold to be productive for you? So, that really impacts, your turnover. So having a good culture, understanding what your employee needs are, you want to keep your people that have that knowledge and have your A performers stay. And then that way, these same people can help, train and mentor any new people coming in. And kind of leads into the next question as far as, how do you formulate a strategy? Where do you start when you want to, start implementing something? Well, first, when you need to analyze your demographics, look at within your organization, analyze, what type of people you have right now in our, work environment, our culture. We have 4 different generations in the workplace. We have the baby boomers, the Gen X, millennials, and Gen Zs. All have different needs. So they're all in their different areas of their career stage. So you need to kind of look at that as far as how many baby movers do you have versus, say, the Gen Z population. So studies that have come out and said that the baby boomers and Gen Xs, they're usually more likely to be satisfied in their positions, very less likely to leave. And then we have the millennials and Gen Zs. They usually have the highest turnover because they are looking for, either higher benefits and compensation to kind of get going and as far as their careers are concerned. And, like I said, the job market favors that. So there is a little bit more job hopping with them. So, today, knowing those ratios will help gauge what your workers need and who you're gonna, work with as far as some of these benefits are concerned. And then, you're also competing with other organizations. You have competition. You want to keep your A players. So you need to have those conversations with your top A performers to find out, what are they looking for? Are they looking for advancement? Do they need more development? What makes them happy within their job so that they'll be stayed and they'll stay engaged. Engagement is huge part of keeping your people and making sure there's not high turnover. And then once you have all of that information and you've gathered that data to analyze, then you can move on to your strategy. You want to start with addressing their needs from, you can, once you've identified those, you can establish training development. You can look at your work environment. If flexible work arrangements is a possibility, you can optimize your workforce, allocate resources, all these different things based on, once you hear from your employees on what their needs are and what they're looking for.
Yeah, different employees will have different things that they're looking for by generation, by where they're at in life. And that's going to motivate them to make different decisions about their desire to stay in the job they're in or to keep looking. But Lauren, what are some of the common reasons that employees are going to leave an organization?
Yeah, both Kirk and Lisa talked about compensation earlier, and I definitely agree with that. But there's a lot of data to suggest that it's definitely not the only reason, and oftentimes it's not the biggest reason for employees. So this can be really industry specific, this can be generational specific, but especially with how much the world has changed in the last 3 years, 4 years, how long has it been? But remote work and flexible, I won't even say remote, I will just say flexible work arrangements is really desirable for candidates. I wouldn't say it was unheard of, but it definitely wasn't common. You didn't hear employees asking for, remote work or, that flexibility to blend their work and their life together in the way that we have now. I think, right, it's just in a lot of industries, we saw that people could complete work from wherever. And a lot of the clients that we work with have realized hiring the best talent, depending on where you are, if you're in Tallahassee, Florida, and you're in a really specific niche market, are you really going to be able to find, right? Are you casting a wide enough net if you're just looking in that geographic region? So, but sorry, let me get back on track to your question. So employees leave for a lot of reasons. I think the work-life balance in some cases, right, that flexibility can be really important. Compensation can be a piece of it. I've heard a lot of people say, people don't leave jobs, they leave bosses. I think that can be true. I tend to disagree with that. I don't think that's always true. I think people leave jobs for a lot of reasons, but right, a leader that they don't agree with or that they don't feel valued by, a team that they don't, feel like they're connected to, like Kirk said. And culture, we've talked a lot about culture. That plays a big role into it. I went to a conference recently, and one of the sessions I attended was by a friendship expert, which was cool to hear from someone who's a friendship expert. But she had a multi-year study that showed employees are 7 times more likely to stay at work when they have and I'm going to air quote it, a best friend at work, right? Because that doesn't mean it's their best friend that they're hanging out with all the time, but when people feel connected to an organization, retention skyrockets. And so, right, I think that goes into all those different pieces. So yeah, I think it depends on the person, it depends on the industry, it depends on the generation, but I think of it like a pie, and there's a lot of pieces of that pie versus, a ranking order.
Yeah, that's a good point, because that's just building that loyalty, right? If you can build your employee loyalty through either, that constant communication and understanding what your employees need and having a friend, having them really engaged. I mean, all of that's building that loyalty for them to stay, for sure.
Yeah, and the other thing I've read about more recently is that the younger generations, to your point, Lisa, there's differences in what people want out of work. Generally speaking, younger people want more of a sense of purpose out of their work. They don't want to come in and make widgets and then go home. They want to know that their work matters. So just to the extent that companies can frame their work on why it matters, what's the purpose of the organization. So I'm talking about like mission statements, core values, not to make money, right? That's all businesses want to make money. Most businesses want to make money unless you're a nonprofit. But what's the purpose? Why does the organization exist? And so the more you can connect that to people, the deeper connection they'll have to work, especially for younger generations.
And the younger generations, they want to hear it often. They want to hear often that, that their work is, on the right track, and, what their purpose is, and how, and be involved in a better culture, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of feedback.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I guess to that end, what do the employees want? Kirk, what are some strategies to help reduce turnover and retain talent? And this is being recorded, so strategies to reduce turnover, retain talent. We'll all make notes.
I think to start off with, as we've said already, is that it's unique for each organization. And I can't emphasize this enough to say that you can have a strategy, but if it doesn't align with your organizational needs, if you haven't done that listening, if you haven't asked those questions, we're not going to have the right strategy for you. So we've got to make sure that we're doing and laying those foundational pieces first before we're going to be able to roll out a strategy that's going to make a difference here. So I think the first thing that I would say is it is about resources. It's about allocating the right resources to the solution, as is often the case in these type of problems. But if we know the skill set that we're losing in an organization, how do we target those skills? Have we done our homework to figure out exactly where the gap is? Are we looking for and being mindful to the workloads of our existing workforce? Do we know if Billy or Naja is the best person for this job? So making sure that we're recruiting for talent that is going to complement our already existing talent pool. So allocating resources, dedicating those resources to the right solution is going to be kind of your first step. But as far as specific strategies go, I mean, one of the things that we hear, I would say, is at the top of the bell curve when we look at these results, is that employees are looking for learning and development opportunities. If we can provide those type of opportunities in the workplace, we are more likely to retain those employees. We all know that the workflow sometimes ebbs and flows. And there are natural kind of cycles in any industry that you look at. Like if we're dealing with healthcare, there might be a slower period of time during the summer where people are not as sick and not dealing with as many complications from illness. We might be able to do training and development over the summer. We're probably going to be looking at doing training and development for hospitality over the summer as well, and not in those peak vacation months. So developing strategies that are going to address both industry and organizational needs are really important. But again, listening to what the employees want so that we're implementing the best strategy possible. I know that the other people on the panel probably have a lot of good suggestions, so I'm not going to steal everyone's thunder, but I definitely want to come back and talk a little bit more about how relationships fit into that dynamic.
Yeah, Lauren or Lisa, anything that you have seen work, turnover strategies or turnover mitigation strategies that you've seen work?
The only thing I'll double down on is just listening. And so we already talked about it, but just I think it relates to this as well. Like listen to your team and understand why and act on it. Right. And listen and be empathetic and don't make excuses. Like just really hear from your team of what they love, what they don't love. A lot of people have probably heard of exit interviews. I've done many exit interviews in my time, and you hear why people leave and you hear their reasons. But stay interviews aren't as common. And so stay interviews are basically when you ask kind of the inverse of that, of what do you love about your job? What could I change? If you had my favorite question to ask is like, if you had a magic wand, what would you change with the company or your role or your boss, whatever it might be? Like ask those questions while you have the people in the seats, not when they've given notice, because at that point, obviously it's too late. So stay interviews, that's a tactic that I really like recommending and helping people build and implement. I found them to be very beneficial.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I have a passion for training and development. I love training. So, one thing that I can say is naturally as human beings, we tend to get bored, so if we're doing the same work over and over and it's kind of the same thing, you start losing a little bit of your engagement in your work, and then you kind of get bored with that. So if you can listen to your employees and find out, what are their other interests? Is there other things within the organization they'd like to do or like to get developed? And that's a perfect opportunity to introduce them to some training and development. And that really will, kind of bump them up as far as their engagement goes. So even though they'll be doing their daily work, they have other things, then projects they can be brought into where they're learning new things and they're feeling a part of a team, and then they're feeling appreciated that their knowledge is being utilized and they have purpose. So, really bringing that training and development in based on what the worker wants is really helpful and keeps them engaged.
And I'll add one before Kirk talks about relationships. And it's very simple. If people are leaving for compensation, even if they're not leaving for compensation, I think it's a good thing to maybe benchmark your positions to the market on a regular basis. Doesn't have to be quarterly. It's not going to change that much. Maybe annually, even every other year, benchmarking to the market. I think you can see things on job posts. We're offering this salary or this wage. And I think, in my opinion, you don't want to overreact and try and match all the noise that's out there, but that could be like your true north every year, or every other year, benching it to the market. And that way you can tell your employees confidently, hey, we're comparing you to the market and we're paying you 50%, 60%, whatever. That gets into compensation philosophy, which, we could probably cover on a different Ask the HR Expert. But that way, at least that's kind of, I've heard that described as a hygiene factor for a job that, all the culture and the listening, isn't going to keep someone if you're paying, below market wages, right? It's kind of table stakes to get people in the door. And then all the other stuff are the reasons that they stay. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, Kirk, what about employee relationships? And are you going to talk about one-on-ones?
I am going to talk about one-on-ones, but one thing I want to talk about first is don't wait. Like, don't wait to build relationships with your employees. Like, get in there on day one and ask questions that are going to connect you with your employee base. Like, ask questions about what your employees are doing for the holidays. Ask if they celebrate certain holidays. Like, make sure that you know what your employees like, what they don't like. Again, we talked about this, both Lisa and Lauren and Mark, all of our panelists have hit on this, is that we want to make sure that we're engaged and hearing what our employees have to say. If our employees don't feel like you're cued in to the small details of their life, they're not going to be energized. They're not going to want to stay. And when an opportunity comes along, and there are better ones in the market sometimes, they're going to be tempted to look at those, because they're going to say to themselves, my boss doesn't know like what is important to me. They don't know that I have a sick mom that I'm caring for on the side. They don't know that I'm struggling with childcare arrangements and having difficulties getting to work. So make sure that you're having those conversations. They're not hard. I will tell you, like, we do team building exercises. We coach our clients every day. Like, ask the simple questions, do some kind of, teaser a week. Like, what's your favorite Christmas carol, or what's your favorite holiday tradition? Make sure that you're asking those questions so that they can be engaged with you, because when the time rolls around and you have to have a difficult conversation with an employee, it is far easier to address those conversations when you've established a foundation and a relationship and rapport with them. So to that end, I want to dive into the one-on-one. So one of the best practices that we recommend is that you engage in regular one-on-one conversations with your employees. You can do that on a weekly basis. You can do it on a monthly basis, whatever works for your organization. But make sure that you're scheduling that time with the employees. It can be 15 minutes, but it needs to be 15 intimate minutes with them that is scheduled, that won't get interrupted, that you are prioritizing and making sure that your employees know that this is an opportunity for you to check in with them. And also, don't always drive the agenda. Make sure that it's not always about you. Sometimes it can be about what they want to talk about, what they want to bring to your attention. What concerns and needs did they have? Because again, this gives you one more opportunity to engage with them, listen to their needs, and find out what is going to keep them in the critical role that they're in.
Yeah, Kurt, one of the things that you're doing when you're having those conversations that you might not realize is happening is you're building trust. So when you're building that trust with the employees, you're, for the long term of it, you're also building a better culture, which then, that employee may not jump ship for an extra 50 cents or $1 because they're very happy where they're at. They're happy and they have a good relationship with their coworkers and a good relationship with their manager, and there's trust there.
Yeah. I think the one-on-ones are something we use internally at Tandem. It's something we recommend to clients as well. But I guess practically speaking, Lauren, did you have any tips or advice on like how to conduct a one-on-one, how to make that work?
I think there's varying levels of formality that's needed. I agree with Kirk when he's saying, don't drive the agenda. This is not your time to share feedback with the employee, your time to check in on project. Like, this needs to be employee driven. Doesn't mean that there's not collaborative conversation, or you can't say, hey, I want to make sure that you come to every one-on-one with a brief update on the projects you're working on. But it shouldn't be, it should be a time where the employee can really talk about the obstacles that they're facing, talk about things that they want to work on in the future, be able to be vulnerable with you on interpersonal struggles that they're having. So, and I think, right, that comes with trust. That's probably you're not probably going to have that conversation with the leader that you don't trust. It doesn't happen. So like they said, build the trust, be that person that follows through, and make sure that the employee knows that that's their time. Don't be a time hog in those one-to-ones.
And I'll just jump in real quick and add that thank you, Lisa and Lauren. I think those are great points. make sure that your employees know that this is not just their time, but also how they want to leverage you as a resource. Some employees want to come to you because they want to vent. They just want to be heard. Other employees want to come to you because they really do want you to problem solve with them. I have had more than one conversation in this context where people will come and say, I don't want you to solve it. I just want you to listen. So make sure, again, even in those moments, that you're listening and kind of tuned in to what your employees are really needing out of those conversations.
Yeah, and it's something I've learned the hard way maybe is to ask that. If we're in a conversation, do you want me to jump in and help with this, or do you just need me to listen? But yeah, and to Lauren's point, these conversations build trust. Trust takes time, right? That's another reason why turnover, I think, erodes culture. It's harder to trust people that you just met. They're just coming in, or they're just going. You don't have, I think of culture as like a collection of shared experiences. Well, if you have people turning over, if you have a revolving door, you don't have those shared experiences. You had shared experiences with people that are now working somewhere else. So that's, it's a cascading effect. I want to do a time check. We have, by my clock, 14 minutes left to the top of the hour. So this would be a good time. If you have any questions, please drop those in the Q&A box. Don't have any there yet, but please feel free, start typing them out. We had one question on hard conversations and employee engagement. I wonder though if we could circle back, if we could forego that and circle back to turnover stats, different ways to slice and dice turnover, different ways to look at it. And what I'm thinking about here is how we will sometimes, or how we at Tandem look at turnover in terms of, voluntary, involuntary, and that waterfall. So I can talk about it. I don't know if anyone wanted to jump in on that or if I should just run with it.
I could start if that's all right.
Yeah.
I think just to take it even one step back, track it. So before we even talk about how to track it, just if this is something that you want to work on in your organization, or you want to make sure that you're keeping an eye on, like track it somehow. And if you're a small organization, that might be an Excel file where you've got the name and the reasons why they left and the amount of tenure. Like the data is powerful. Like, so you have to have a way to gather the data. If you're a larger organization, or if you have an HRIS system where you can track this, there's a lot of data that you can pull from that as well, where you don't have to have, a separate way to track that. But so I guess just first of all, like have a way to gather the data, because you don't want to react to it and then all of a sudden you go, wow, I didn't even realize how many people. Like keep an eye on it, have this be a data point and something that you measure that you're keeping an eye on. So all of a sudden you don't see these lagging metrics, and then all of a sudden you realize, wow, I didn't realize how many people are leaving our organization. We haven't got our arms around it. But to your question, Marcus, I think, right, usually that kind of the two main things that we talk about with turnover is voluntary and involuntary. Right, voluntary is they're making the choice to leave, involuntary is the company is making the choice to leave. But another thing that's important to think about is regrettable or non-regrettable. So there might be voluntary terminations where that employee made the choice to leave, but it's not regrettable, because maybe it was someone you were actively performance managing, or they were not a good fit for the role. Maybe it was someone that just you hired without understanding that they didn't have the full understanding of the role. So I think it's important to look at it in that way, because you're never going to have 0 of one or of 100 of the other. But if you have a lot of voluntary regrettable turnover, that means that people are choosing to leave your organization and you didn't want them to leave your organization. So it can just, that data can help really you steer your efforts on where it is. If you're having a lot of involuntary terminations, especially early on, that might be an indicator that you're not being selective enough in the hiring process, or maybe you're rushing to fill a position that that person wasn't the right fit for. So I think looking at it in that sense, involuntary versus voluntary, and then regrettable versus non-regrettable, that can help you really focus your efforts on if there's something that sticks out that doesn't maybe fit the standard.
Yeah, if you have a lot of voluntary turnover that is not regrettable, right? Like you said, that's probably an indication that they were not a good fit or they were being performance managed. To me, I think those are HR wins, right? That means that we're setting the expectation for the employee. We're giving them feedback on, hey, here's where you're at, here's where I need you, or this is not a fit. And the employee gets that message and decides this isn't the place for me, and they leave. Like, I think those, if you just looked at voluntary, involuntary, that doesn't tell the full picture, right? We actually did have a question about stay interviews. Can we talk more about stay interviews and provide some key questions that you might ask during this type of a meeting? So who wants to start us off with that?
I can kick us off. I know we all probably have a little bit of experience in this area, but stay interviews are basically orchestrated so that we're connecting with the employee to ask them why they stay. And it can be everything's going swimmingly and everything's fine and it's just a check-in, or it can be we've noticed things about that employee's disengagement. And again, this is where, as good leaders, you need to be cued in and have developed some of that relationship building with your team. But if you know that someone's checked out, if they're normally a talker and they're not talking in meetings, if you know that somebody's struggling or see someone struggling with attendance issues where they've never had those before, those are cues for you that you want to engage with that employee and check in and basically say, hey, what's going on with you? You want to keep it very open-ended. You don't want to be confrontational or pointed. You just want to say, this is our opportunity to check in. I've noticed these things. They may not be anything, but I'm concerned enough about you that I'm taking the time to try to figure out what's going on. 99% of those employees are going to appreciate the ask. They're going to appreciate that you're taking the time to connect with them. You're demonstrating trust. You're demonstrating that you want to pursue a relationship and that you also want them to stay. So use that opportunity to kind of figure out and use it as kind of a search and find, like what is going on with that employee? What maybe are they struggling with? And kind of do a deep dive into that individual circumstance.
The kind of open-ended questions, like I think what you're talking about is like a targeted, like, hey, if we know something's off and we think someone's at risk, we're going to go ask them. Obviously, it's going to be perceived a little weird if you ask them like, hey, so why do you stay here? Like, they're going to think you're pushing them out. So I think what you're saying, like, if it's a targeted one like that, what's going on? I've noticed this. Talk to me about it. Like, trying to get them to open up. So more open-ended, more just check in, see how you're doing, and then let the conversation go from there.
And you can always ask them too, just that in that term of, what can I do to keep you here? Let's talk about your work. What are you happy with? What would you like to do different? Are there some things and projects, or, are you looking to become a manager at some point, or be, in another role here that we can help get you there? Tell me what I can do to get, to make sure you stay with us and stay on board with us. And not only do employees appreciate the ask, but they're like, oh, wow, like my manager wants me to stay here. I have a purpose. I feel valued, and just having the conversation.
I pulled up the guide that I use. I know the question was, I can share a couple examples, Marcus, just because I do these biannually with the people on my team. So even just to start off, like, what do you like most about your job? What accomplishments recently have given you the most satisfaction? What talents are not properly utilized in your current role? Again, you don't want to ask this in a point where it feels like, because it's not, you're literally trying to keep them. So you're trying to get these answers. A couple others are, this is one I like, what's one or two things you would like to change about your role? Or what's one or two things you'd like to change about the company? It's important to look at it on that individual level, but then also zoom out and look at themes. So especially if you lead a big team, or you have a lot of employees that you're having these conversations with, look for some of those consistencies. Of course, address the individual level, but you might be able to see some themes that bubble up and could have a big impact.
Yeah, and they may need a little time to give you an answer, and that's okay. So maybe you can pose those questions ahead of your meeting with them, or in your meeting with them, let them know and say, hey, if you don't have, and you need some time to think about it, and you don't have an answer for me today, think about it, and we'll talk about it in our next time together. So, because sometimes they have to do some self-discovery themselves to figure out, oh yeah, what do I want? What's my next move? Where do I want to go?
I've even seen in like company wide, I don't think they called it a stay interview. It was an engagement survey. Even asking the question, if I were to leave, or I am planning on leaving, or I am looking. Obviously that's harder to do, one-on-one. So if it's a company wide, like anonymous type survey, I am planning on leaving. I see myself here in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, or whatever. If I were to leave, this is what I think would be the predominant reason for that. Yeah, but the context matters, and how the conversation, or how the questions arise matter. So we've got 4 minutes left. If anyone has any, we have another question. Is it possible to get a copy of the past webinars? Absolutely, it is. We have
Great
those
question.
available. Yeah, we have those available. If you're a client of Tandem, we have them available on our client resources page. If you're not a client of Tandem, just shoot me an email and I'll get them over to you. Okay, let's see. We'll see if we can do this question before the top of the hour. Notice that sometimes an employee can feel overvalued and tend to leverage that feeling to over ask and to try and threaten their employment status if not given the ask. How would you address that type of a situation? The employee thinks they've got you, and they're demanding the moon and the stars in order to stay.
I think you're honest with them and say, we really value you. I'm hearing what your needs are, but this is what we can give, and this is, and that's it. Sometimes people always say they want the third option, and then there is no third option. So, I think being honest with them and seeing what happens. So sometimes they'll just see if they can call your bluff, and nothing will happen. They won't move on, or they won't leave you. So, but at the end of the day, if you can't give them more than what they're asking for, we have to learn to say no. I don't know,
Yeah,
Kurt, Lauren, you have any thoughts?
Well, that can put the leader and the employer in such a difficult spot, right? That is not a fun place to be in. And I agree with Lisa, just be honest. And I think also, you also have a responsibility to be consistent. So if they're asking for compensation that just doesn't align with that position, if they're asking for special work arrangements that don't fit that position, right? That's hard when someone's threatening their employment status. I would say don't deflect it, acknowledge that, but just, try to redirect that conversation in a way that's not possible, because in this role, I need you to X. So let's talk about some other options. That can be tempting to bite at it, or to, also kind of, I don't want to say overreact, but add more gasoline on that. So I'd say, yeah, like Lisa said, be honest, stay consistent. But that's a really hard spot to be in.
You could always say, hey, let me look at that, and then we'll circle back, so at least they're feeling like, oh, they're hearing me, they're looking at it. And then you just come back and say, sorry, we can't because of XYZ, but this is what we do have. And this is what I can offer you.
Again, it poses an opportunity to have conversation with that employee. Like, depending on how it's positioned, obviously you don't want it to be a threat, but it might be an opportunity where you can not necessarily offer increased compensation, but maybe I can offer you something else that you want. Maybe what you're really wanting is more flexibility, or increased responsibility. So again, it provides an opportunity, even though it may be difficult at first, to have a great conversation with that employee.
Exactly.
Yeah, I would start looking for plan B. Just because the employee feels like they've got you, I would start looking for a plan B, not saying you would ever have to get there, but like, what would I do if this employee did leave, right? But I promote someone, would have to look outside the organization. I would also probably lay out some facts for the employee, and then ask the employee, well, how am I supposed to do that? You know, if you're asking for a 20% raise, gosh, that would put you head and shoulders above all of your peers. It's not in the budget. How am I supposed to do that? And then it's not you saying no, it gives the employee an opportunity to maybe offer a solution, but it puts it back in their court as you know, given all these realities, this isn't, help me overcome these realities, basically. So, really good discussion. I actually hate that we have to shut it down here, but I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Thank you to presenters, Lisa, Kirk, and Lauren. This was a really good discussion. We could probably go on for another hour if we really wanted to. Thank you to our attendees and the registrants. We got some good questions before the session and then in the session. So thank you very much for that. If you have anything that was top of mind that you didn't get a chance to ask or we didn't get to, my email address is there. Please shoot me an email. I'll be happy to talk to you. And we also do these every month. So look for us again next month, and we will see you then. Thanks again.
Thanks,
Have a good
everyone.
day, everybody. Bye-bye.